This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Introduction. Being a part of the American literary legacy, The Great Gatsby is filled with symbolism and subtle allusions to other crucial works of art. Though some of the symbols appear in the novel only a couple of times, they still serve to reinforce the impact of the main message and, therefore, produce a tremendous effect on the reader. The clock that is featured in the novel in some of the chapters is one such symbol. By incorporating metaphorical elements that allude to the fleeting nature of time, The Great Gatsby emphasizes the idea of the futility of life and the inescapability of the past and its mistakes. Analysis. The clock is the symbol of time. The mantelpiece clock that Fitzgerald uses as a means of creating a symbol of time appears rather late in the novel. Belonging to Nick, it is barely referred to in the novel at first. However, its very mentioning in the 5th chapter that the context of Gatsby and Daisy's conversation suddenly puts the intended meaning and symbolism of the item in question in perspective. Although using a clock, albeit a mantelpiece one, as a symbol of time is far from being original, how the symbol is incorporated into the narrative makes the symbolism of the item in question all the more emotionally charged. Every detail of it, from the clock being now defunct to it nearly hurting Gatsby, indicates that it serves a bigger purpose in the story. Therefore, the specified item, though having been mentioned only a couple of times in the novel, deserves a closer analysis as a crucial part of the symbolic framework of the novel. The many meanings of the symbol. The idea of the mantelpiece clock representing time in The Great Gatsby might seem quite banal, yet Fitzgerald manages to make it a refreshing perspective by mentioning the clock only in one scene. Before introducing the infamous situation with the clock, Fitzgerald allows the reader to build an understanding of the significance of time as one of the key metaphors in the novel. Therefore, the clock as a symbol contains multiple layers of meaning. A metaphor for reversing the clock. Another crucial meaning that the clock in the novel bears concerns Gatsby's willingness to go back in time to when he was a much happier man. Therefore, the clock becomes the symbol of the impossibility of reversing time despite Gatsby's burning desire to do so. As a result, the symbol that the clock represents becomes a tragic reminder of the impossibility of changing the past or continuing to live in it. Hopes for the present and the future. One of the most remarkable details of the symbol under analysis and the scene in which it is featured is that, against the reader's expectations, the clock does not break. Even though it is defunct, it does not fall from the mantelpiece and, thus, remains intact. He turned and caught it with trembling fingers, and set it back in place. The described development of a seemingly trivial and barely significant element of the plot symbolizes a much greater concept than one might initially suspect. Namely, while the fact that the clock is defunct refers to the impossibility of turning the past back, the clock not falling from the mantelpiece symbolizes slight hope for the present and even for the future. The futility of controlling time. Another dimension of the symbol in question concerns the lead character's relationship with time. Namely, the clock as a symbol of time also represents Gatsby's subconscious attempt at controlling time, particularly seeking to revert his relationships with others to the previous status quo. The described attitude can be seen particularly clearly in the part of the scene where Gatsby is trying to prevent the clock from falling and breaking. He turned and caught it with trembling fingers, and set it back in place. Although one could argue that the specified course of action might be seen as a natural reaction to a heavy clock having nearly fallen on his head, the further development of the scene confirms the initial supposition. Namely, the fact that Gatsby looks at the clock with a nearly tragic expression even though the item in question is safe supports the idea that he is wistful about the idea of turning the tide back. Then he sat down, rigidly, his elbow on the arm of the sofa and his chin in his hand. "I'm sorry about the clock," he said. The distinctive feeling of sorrow that can be sensed in this line, as well as the atmosphere of sadness and wistfulness that envelopes the lead characters in the described scene, are nearly palpable. Thus, the futility of Gatsby's effort to revert the time and return to his past, where he still had a chance to build a relationship with Daisy and turn his life around, was emphasized. Gatsby's death and the symbolism of the clock. Finally, the meaning of the clock as a symbol needs to be considered in the context of how the novel ends. Namely, the fact that the clock is introduced as a broken item hints not only at the state of distraught in which Gatsby finds himself but also at his death at the end of the novel. Moreover, the fact that the clock nearly falls from the mantelpiece indicates that Gatsby's life is hanging by a thread. Therefore, the clock on the mantelpiece can be regarded as a symbol of life and death, as well as the ticking time bomb that will eventually set off at some point, marking the end of the protagonist's life. Therefore, the clock serves as a subtle yet powerful symbol that points to the protagonist's inevitable and incredibly tragic death at the end of the novel. This is even more heartbreaking. The scene in question implies heavily that Gatsby does not want to die and is unwilling to abandon his pursuits. I was in the drug business, and then I was in the oil business. But I'm not in either one now. Although one could argue that the actions that Gatsby takes are thoroughly removed from the idea of reasoning and focusing on the search for a rational solution, his being shot by jealous Tom makes his death all the more unbelievable and disappointing. Conclusion. By adding new elements and ideas to the metaphor of time through the use of the clock as a key symbol, The Great Gatsby makes a range of poignant and often heartbreaking statements concerning the titular character. From the prediction of his death to addressing other crucial plot developments, the clock in the novel might be mentioned only once, yet it remains one of the central symbols in it. By incorporating a seemingly simple concept of the clock as a metaphor for anything time-related, Fitzgerald has managed to make a poignant and meaningful commentary concerning the main character, the era in which he lived, and the challenges that he had to address, therefore, making J. Gatsby an incredibly relatable character. This essay on the clock as a symbol in Great Gatsby was written and submitted by a student just like you. The Ivy Panda Samples database hosts thousands of works similar to this one, on various subjects. Visit ivypanda.com to find what you are looking for.